largely done by case law. So if you look going back all the way to the 1965 Civil Rights Act, a lot of those litigation that occurred through that act sort of implemented what I call the third rule of redistricting. Everything else can kind of be looked at in different ways, but those are really the three basic things that you look at when you're drawing your district line. So it becomes really complicated because politics are involved, but if you look at the basic rules, it's actually pretty straightforward. And the way you guys are set up, I don't think it's as complicated. You don't have single member districts for all of you, so that would make it much more complicated. And I will say this, we were talking about this earlier. I think that it'll be interesting to see how they draw the CAB legislative delegations. That will be done in November. They've called a special session for November 3rd. It'll last about 2 weeks. And right now, you really don't have a Decatur-centric legislator. You don't have someone who's kind of really looking at the interests of Decatur. So the hope is that they would draw districts that would maybe put someone as Decatur-centric legislator. So we were talking about your population of roughly 25,000. A House district will have around 58,000 members as an ideal district size. So you could represent virtually half of its House district. And a Senate district will have about 178,000. So you would still represent a decent portion if you could stay contiguous and stay together and not be cut up into a lot of different pieces. So that's one of the things I think that we can take a look at. We're certainly watching for in the next coming weeks when the special session comes.
So how could we, I mean, we have been, as we said, severely hurt because we don't have House members who actually are representing Decatur. No House member relies on Decatur for a substantial share of the votes. I mean, are primarily. So what would be, I would assume that we kind of have, what cards do we have to play? I mean, how could we actually try to influence that? So that we could actually have a legislator that cares about it.
And we'll talk about this a little bit more in the coming slides, but one of the things I've talked to Dr. Furman about is building that relationship, that core relationship with some of your members. And so we've already had a meeting with Senator Parent. We would really like to get Dr. Furman in front of some other legislators and get them to get to know her better, get to know y'all better. And I think the more you can build that relationship, the more likely they're going to say, you know what, this is a community I like to represent. It's cohesive. It makes sense for me to represent this community. And so really, if we can find a champion legislator who wants to represent Decatur, they can fight for keeping it as a whole as possible instead of having it subdivided. So you don't have that fractured representation. So that's typically what you would look at, and there's a lot of different things that are going to place. When you think about the House has 180 House districts, and so DeKalb County is just one piece of that district, and the city of Decatur is just one piece of that. So there's a big piece of the pie that will continually move around. But I think if we can get a champion in a legislator or two that really wants to have Decatur as a part of their district, they can work towards those goals.
So we should be, I mean, have a month to pull that off. So we should get to work on it.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that we'll talk about is kind of building those relationships with your legislators, and I think we should, sort of look at the ones who already represent the city of Decatur, and where we can kind of grow that relationship and encourage them to try to keep the city as whole as possible. And that's not atypical of what all cities do. They really do, in all school districts, you really want to have, whether you're the county or whether you're the city or whether you're a region, you want to have someone representing you that has the same community of interest, because they're likely to advocate for your specific interests.
A little impatient with the sorry. Okay, so annexation. There's an active study committee on cityhood annexation. It's chaired by Representative Victor Anderson. He's actually from the North Georgia area, but they've already held a couple of meetings. The most recent meeting that they had last week, I believe, there was actually a couple of parents from City Schools of Decatur that spoke at that meeting. You can go back on the General Assembly's website and watch that video.
We can provide you that link if you want.
Yeah, I can send Dr. Furman the link, and she can send it out to you guys. So you can watch and see what they said. There's always, a little bit of tension with GMA and ACCG, when it comes to annexation. They obviously go back and forth. I know that this past session, there was an annexation bill dropped that was specific to the city schools of Decatur. We've already, like Don said, set a meeting, with Dr. Furman and Senator Parent, to kind of talk through some of those things. That legislation does have a sunset clause on it, based on the numbers that you guys will pull over the next couple of years. So it'll get revisited in a couple of years. That legislation is those annexation rules. But I've been actively watching this study committee, and I expect that there will be more annexation bills that are dropped in maybe during special session. They are going to allow some local legislation during special session in November, but I suspect that most of them will be dropped, if any, in January when regular session starts.
I have a question.
Sure.
GMA and ACCG.
GMA is the Georgia Municipal Association, and ACCG is the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia. So,
They act much like the Georgia School Boards Association.
Right.
They're the advocate for
municipalities
elected
and
officials.
counties.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and we attend those conferences every year, so we are kind of always know what's happening, especially when it's related to annexation of the school boards that we represent.
Okay, teacher pay raises. So when Governor Kemp was running for office in 2018, you may remember that he ran, one of his platform campaign promises was a $5,000 pay raise to teachers, $3,000 of which was covered in 2019. And then he had initially put the final $2,000 in his FY22 budget, but COVID kind of, derailed that, and it was cut by the legislature this year. So he has assured teachers that will that they will see that next year. So we're looking at that for the FY23 budget, potentially amended FY22, which would be early in the 2022 session. In addition to that, it's really been an emphasis for the legislature over the last few years, particularly in the last 2 years with COVID, to recruit and retain teachers. And so last year they passed a series of bills that they're calling the teacher pipeline. They still have some out there that they will be working on in 2023. But in 2022. But some of these bills included such things as incentives for veterans to become teachers, different mentoring incentives, some new and improved and updated training policies, and also some creative programs that they're doing at historically Black colleges to boost the numbers of graduating teachers.
Well, I just want to add that I think the thing that we're competing against, and potentially the budget at the state level has been unbelievably good.
Yeah.
There's a major surplus. They've largely refilled their rainy day fund. But we are competing against a push to continue to lower the state income tax. It was at 6%, they lowered it to 5.75%. There's a big goal to lower it to 5.5%, but that comes with about a $500 million price tag that they have to do annually. Once you take the money out, it's not a one-time tax cut. So it's a big competing factor versus the $2,000, which is $350 million, I think, in the budget.
$340 million.
Yeah, so it's, that's sort of the competing thing. It can be a little bit of a zero-sum game.
And one incentive I actually forgot to mention, which was a big one, was the $1,000 teacher one-time bonus that they received.
I have no idea if this is a concern or not, but I thought I'd mention it, which is that we went ahead and gave the full $5,000 raise. Pull back. We've already done that prior. Which means that if they restore the money, it'll come back up full. The teachers are ready. What's the possibility that the extra $2,000 would kind of be obligated, that we would have to go ahead and, it would be a decision that we'd have to decide whether they want to pay that extra, then they want $7,000 raise, $5,000. So I can imagine writing the legislation that says, here's an extra $5,000, but this $2,000 must go to the teachers. I'd want to make sure that the legislation didn't require that.
And that's been an issue for almost all larger systems in particular, because they give a much bigger supplement than smaller, especially rural systems. So in the last version, and we suspect they'll be in this version too, it gives the local systems a lot of flexibility on that match piece. So I would suspect they would take that into consideration, and that's I'm glad you brought it up. I did not know that you had given the whole 5. So we need to make sure that the language is inserted in there that gives you the flexibility that says you've already done it. You know, you're not trying to go to 7, essentially.
You might want to do it, but it should be a choice.
Yeah.
So in fact, there was one word I missed, that you said it will make our teachers
Whole. They'll get the whole 5. Our teachers have already got the whole 5.
So, and I know that's been an issue. So they've always added flexibility language. We just need to probably really focus to make sure that covers us. So I'm glad, I did not know that, so this is great information for us as well.
So this year, the General Assembly passed an increase to the Special Needs Scholarship Act. We already had one that has been useful for students with IEPs. This year, Senator Gooch went on to expand that scholarship act, and it now includes students who have either an IEP or a 504. So as you know, it's not required to have both. You don't have to have a 504 you don't have to have an IEP to have a 504. So this list is now extensively longer than it has been in the past, and there are other areas in where that scholarship money can be used, as opposed to just in the classroom. It can be used for other things outside of the classroom, extracurriculars, things of that nature, if that needs to be covered for that student. I can provide the list to Dr. Furman of the expansion of the disabilities that are now included in the Scholarship Act. I'll provide that to Dr. Furman so that she can share it with all of you. It's gone from like 10 things to like 35 things, or disability. So now, it's much less, so it's already a small percentage of students that access this fund, when it was just IEPs. We suspect that it will remain a small percentage of students that use it, but, it may be something that you guys see an increase of, students leaving your school system to be able to use this scholarship, for private school or for changing school districts or whatever it may be.
Haven't had any yet.
Yeah. So, I mean, and like I said, it's a very small number of students that were already using it. So I venture to believe that it will probably remain a small percentage, but I just wanted to make you guys aware, in case you do start to see an increase of students accessing this fund.
Senator Parent was against this, is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, because it does cost more money for the systems that are impacted, that have more applications. It does widen it, and there's some questions about the validity of those students to get access to those funds.
And to use those funds to go to private.
Does that mean that we pay, that like we're giving the scholarships so they can go to a private school?
Theoretically, they, It was a fun bill for us. We were really at the forefront of helping to negotiate this bill. It was supposed to be specific to charter schools. This was a bill that was really pushed by Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, and it had a lot of things. In the initial reiteration of the bill, it wouldn't really affect city schools in Decatur because I don't think you're at your cap yet for your reimbursement rate for charter systems. But Fulton County was probably the one that was going to be impacted the most, and City of Atlanta, or APS rather, Atlanta Public Schools. So we were able to negotiate back the full rate for the reimbursement, so they weren't impacted by it. But there were a lot of other pieces of this bill that we can go into detail in, but I think the biggest piece, and sort of an illustration of what can happen down there, is we had negotiated what we thought was a fair term for the bill. It passed out of the Senate, went to the House, largely unchanged, and again, it was all fine. It went back to the Senate, for what they consider some minor changes. If a bill is changed in one body or the other, it has to go back to the other for reconsideration. In the Senate, literally on the last day of the session, it was, I want to say, 11 o'clock at night, the sponsor, at the behest of Lieutenant Governor, put in some language that essentially stripped the abilities for not just charter schools, but other schools to get waivers on their IEP program. So what this is going to do, and it passed, it's in law, is that the state board is limited in their ability to provide you with these waivers for these programs. So I don't know if you guys have done an analysis of the cost yet. I don't know, I can't remember if we talked about that, but other school systems, the bigger systems, it has a real financial impact. So this is something that I think we need to visit with very carefully. Lieutenant Governor has announced he's not running for re-election again, which is a good thing for many reasons that I can go through from a school standpoint, and I won't speak to the politics of it other than that he's been a big advocate for private schools and public funding of private schools. But this was his brainchild, and I think this is something that now that he's clearly not going to be in office after the 2022 elections, we can look at peeling back, because it is sort of a dangerous thing when you're limited in what way. The whole point of having a waiver is that you have the ability to use it, and when you strip someone, a school system's ability of a waiver, what's the point in having a state board? I mean, they have the judicial power to do those types of things, and we should leave that in the law. So the board wasn't really in favor of it. We did make some appeal to the state board to try to overturn some of these, try to tighten the rules a little bit, but at this point, I think we're still in a bit of a limbo, and we hope we can expect some change on this in the next session.
Okay, and then the last one, I believe, is regarding pension legislation, and this is House Bill 385 by Shaw Blackman, and Shaw Blackman is your Ways and Means Chairman, so pretty powerful legislator in the House. And this bill, it allows for public school systems to employ retired teachers into a full-time capacity in the classroom. And this is in areas of high need. The areas of high need are determined by your the RESA that the system is assigned. And the beneficiaries that come back to the classroom must have been retired for 1 year. This bill, it was sent for an actuarial study, and that is standard for retirement bills that affect public retirement systems. And so it's been sent for the actuarial review. It will come back during the 2022 session, and this is a part of the governor's pipeline. So this will, the governor's teacher's pipeline. So this will be a big priority of his and his floor leaders in 2022.
And that usually means it has a high probability.
Yes.
Is there any reason we would oppose that?
I can't imagine, but I'd love to hear feedback if there's any reasons that you would. There are a lot of pension bills I know that public schools have a lot of trouble with, and they're all out there.
Mm-hmm.
So once the bill has been introduced, it doesn't go away because the session ends. If you're in this first or second year of biennial, the bills are all active, and 2022 will be the second year of this biennial. But there are bills out there that are floating. There's the Rule of 85 bill.
Yes.
Which what that means is that currently, if you serve 30 years, you could theoretically be 51 years old, and you could retire and draw. What it means is that your years of service and your age must equal 85. So you'd have to be at least 55 with 30 years of service to start drawing. So it causes you to delay your draw period. The argument is that, people who manage the pension system say those 3 years helps the pension system be more viable, less money has to go into it, that kind of thing. And I don't know how many teachers do exactly that actually draw into the system, but that's one of the arguments. So it'd be really great to get feedback from y'all on your thoughts are on these various bills, because some people could argue, well, maybe that's a good thing to make the system stronger. Others say, listen, our pension is our #1 way to draw teachers. And so it'd be great to hear what you all think about these various pension bills. But there's probably a dozen pension bills floating out there right now that have all passed. They're all eligible for passage in 2022. They've all gone through this vetting period that Laura talked about, and they've been studied. So there are some public school advocates, and for instance, the former chairman of the pension committee was a school teacher, so he's a beneficiary. And his argument has continued to be that we have to safeguard the system because we have a system that's unsustainable. For instance, in the last 2 or 3 years, the state, last year they didn't have to because the system was in great shape, but 2 years ago and 3 years ago, they had to fund the system by about to the tune of about $400 million to shore it up. And it's just sort of the nature of what happens with the investments in the system, how many people are drawing. And so the argument was made by, at the time, Chairman Denton, is that I'm a beneficiary and I want the system to be safe. And so there's the one side of it, but then there's the other side that says it's how we draw people, and it doesn't matter if it costs $400 million a year for the state. That's their responsibility. So I'd love more feedback from y'all as you sort of, study it, and we give you more information and get where you all stand on these various bills.
I'd love to see the list of bills that are there. That'd be great.
Yep.
Well, that is,
And we'll have the actuarial study by the end of the year, beginning of next year, and so we can provide you with what the actuarial study comes back as far as this piece of legislation.
In particular, if there are any that deal with the intersection of Social Security and pensions, and we're one of the few systems that continues to pay into both.
Right. You're not like the CAB public schools, where you all are in the Social Security system, right?
We are, correct. And then for this bill, do you know is it written where if a teacher comes back in and the school system decides to hire them, the school system no longer have to pay into the teacher retirement system?
That's part of what the actuarial study will.
as it's written right now, the school still does have to pay.
Okay.
Mhm.
CSD, there's an option to not pay into the
Right.
TRS, and a teacher can opt out, but this would, that sort of stuff is study dependent.
Well, as it's written right now, it is in there, that the school system does still have to pay in. So,
When the study comes out, they may use that to tweak the bill.
yeah, they can still amend the bill, like, through the committee, because the House, it'll go back, when it comes out of the study, it'll go back to the House Retirement Committee, so they can still, and that's in the House, still have to get that to the Senate, so there's still some room.
You have teachers right now that don't have to be a part of the teacher retirement system.
My understanding is, yes, that if a teacher wants to not pay into the teacher's retirement system, they do not have to. But I think that that's true for all of Georgia. I think that if a teacher chooses to not have their check deducted into the TRS and just opts out, they can do that.
And I don't know that this bill would apply, because this is for teachers that are receiving benefits from TRS. But we'll look into it and be sure.
I thought we have that option.
We do on our hiring page. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right.
definitely. I talked to a few people.
But I'll go through and double check and let you know how that is.
Again, we're just excited to be here. We appreciate the opportunity, and we feel free. Don't feel like you can't email us, call us anytime. We're available 24/7, 365 days a year during the session, probably even more. But glad to take any questions or any thoughts you guys might have or any comments.
I'm just wondering in general, because Georgia is looking at such a large surplus, that's great news. And it makes me think about our austerity cuts that we are enduring, because when COVID first hit, it was very uncertain where we would end up, and those were partially restored, but where are we in terms of having those fully restored?
So, and I'd like to know what your definition of that is, because I suspect that when the governor produces his budget, there won't be any austerity cuts in the FY '23 budget.
Okay.
But do we get back the billions of dollars that were cut? No. I mean, if that's what you mean by restored.
No, but we get 100% of QB formula.
Correct. And that's what they'll consider 100% funding.
Minus our 5 mil share.
Minus it.
Right. And that's a whole other conversation I'd like to have. The 5 mil share thing bugs me to beyond.
Is that where we are, though? Is that what's being considered, is that we'll be at that 100% QB minus the fair share?
Yeah, I suspect everything I've heard, I've had a personal conversation with the governor. His intention is in his budget to fully fund QBE for every system. But, the 5 mil share is a whole nother beast.
Actually, when we talk about the QBE being fully funded, it is, quote, fully funded, but there's a lot of issues with the QBE formula that I think needs to be, that I think as a board, we should prioritize. One of them being, they haven't adjusted for inflation. So the numbers that are in the QBE formula are from like 1980 something. So they haven't like said, hey, this is what we were paying for, like $17,000 for a clerical staff. That's what they give us. So we fund the rest of it out of our local fund to give our people living wage, because the money the state's giving us is not sustainable for someone to take a job as a clerical staff. The other one being the money for substitute teachers. So our teachers get 8 days of sick leave. The state gives us to cover all of those 8 days, $150 per teacher. That covers 1 day for our substitute. Those are some of the things that I think, if we're looking at a legislative priority, is to let's bring the QBE formula up to 2021, 2022 dollars, and then let's adjust for the money that we're actually laying out on the local side to make up for, $150 to pay for 8 days of sick leave is just.
So, I think 2 years ago, wasn't there a push, of course, it was Governor Kemp, but recent years, there was a push to, I think there's always a push to completely reformulate. Is that off the table? I know they took a run at it and decided it's too complicated.
Since 1982, there have been 5 blue ribbon study committees. So it's been done it's a very difficult process because it is a zero-sum game, and typically, some of these numbers do work in South Georgia, because their pay is so much lower. And to give you an example, as I'm sure you guys are in this boat, but typically, large metro systems fund anywhere from 60 to 65%, and the 35% comes from state. If you're in a rural system, it might be 90% state, 10% local. And so their argument is, I could raise my millage rate to the max of 20, which is typical for non-grandfathered systems, and I wouldn't raise any more money. Of course, at the same time, they abate every single piece of agricultural property in South Georgia, and they wonder why they don't raise any money when every property has been abated from paying taxes. So it's a difficult situation, and it's a hard argument because there are winners and losers, and the 5 mil share is a great example of that.
So you don't see that discussion being had?
Well, I do think that if we can look at it from the standpoint of, can we get it around the margins? And I think that's where you really get it. If you wanted to I think the problem is everyone looks at it as, can we revamp the whole thing? And then you become absolute winners and losers. But can you revamp the process so that it doesn't cost some system 20% and a gain for whatever, but that we can look at, okay, how about just giving us more money for this? And that's usually where you want it. You want to sort of take it at pieces, and that's how you can usually win. And, in years past, as an example, when there were a lot of fast growth systems, we kept advocating for more money in the capital program for fast growth systems. So that's largely gone away. Almost no system's growing. I don't think there's a single system outside of maybe Forsyth and Cherokee that's actually growing in the state of Georgia. Every single system is getting smaller. So obviously that money's going to go away. Let's figure out a way to capture that and find another way to spend it. And maybe it's in the form of money for substitute teachers or whatever it is, and give us at least a percent change in that. So I think that's the way you tackle it, is let's get those individual columns and tackle pieces that we can.
Another place where the 5% came in. For the longest time, I don't know if it's a priority for it. Longest time, one of our agenda items, we have the ability to charge tuition to students, kind of fluctuating. Enrollment, if we had extra rooms, we'd at least have that option. So there's a state law that says that you can charge, but you can only charge the average cost minus your 5 mil share. Interpreted, which I still don't understand, but the math.
I'll send out that report. It'll be
But
ready for the next.
the end result is that it doesn't make sense. So we had, for a number of years, had that as a priority. That it was really just a wish list. We never actually did. But in terms of things we want from the General Assembly, that might be one. We would have to, at a minimum, to charge the actual cost.
And we'd love to hear if that's still a priority. We can certainly start to take a look at that and try to parse out how we can make that happen. It would affect very few systems at the end of the day, but it would make sense that you'd want, if your actual costs are closer to $12,000, $13,000 a student, you know, hitting your $6,000 per student in tuition or whatever the state share is, doesn't make sense. It's probably even less than that, but you guys may be even higher than 12, you might be closer to 14,
We
15.
were just trying to break even. I mean,
Right.
you know, but let us just charge the actual cost, the average cost per student, instead of taking a loss on it. I think.
That seems like a reasonable thing. So if that's something, and the one thing that we would request, and because your delegations will request this, typically, if there's a specific agenda item, they want you to vote on it as a board. And because it's happened many times before, where they hear from their school board member, and they say, this is what we're gonna do, we're all for this. And then they found out that a majority of the board really wasn't for it, and suddenly they're charged and they dropped a bill. So now they typically require, when I do bills like that, they want me to show them the resolution passed by the local board.
So typically, and sometime it's supposed to happen in September or October, here are 3 or 4 priorities, and it is in fact voted on.
We'd love to help, we can help you craft that in any way, shape, or form. We'd love to talk to you about that. And so when you all are ready, we can sit down with you in any way, shape, or form you'd like, and help you certainly wordsmith it and come up with how you, whatever you want to do. And then when you all vote on it, at least we'll have a template. And I can always show it to legislators and say, nope, we voted on it, it's unanimous, or it's 4-1, or whatever the number.
Another thing that's on our, going to be on our ballot this November is our senior tax exemption, and I mean, you're familiar with that. But that's something that we are only given 2 years on this go-around on it, wasn't it? And that we'll need to, like, it sunsets in 2 years. We had asked for 5, but we were only given 2, which really means we have to kind of stay on top of that, because that will go very quickly. And we'll have to reintroduce that in this, you know, the session beginning in 2023, which is really only months away. And just so you know, we had a study done by Georgia State. We have a good relationship with them. And I'm assuming that now, as this one goes into effect, assuming it gets approved, we'll have even more data to support what we plan to do, but we'll need to kind of stay on top of that, make sure we reintroduce the same or revised version of it again the next upcoming 2 weeks.
Out of curiosity, why did they put a sunset?
Sorry?
Why did they put a sunset, out of curiosity?
So are you familiar, well, we had several things on the table last spring, and I think it was part of a larger negotiation.
Probably talk about something.
Okay. Well, just so you know, I love senior exemption. It's one of my favorite things to talk about because it's a very difficult issue. And there are lots of other options that systems do end up looking at. For instance, we did some work with Fulton County Schools, and when they looked at a full senior exemption for them, it was going to cost them somewhere in the neighborhood of almost $200 million. And against $1 billion budget, that's a real cut. So what we ended up doing was finding something that was palatable for the whole community, and we ended up supporting, the board voted and they supported floating homestead, which really helped the whole community. And I don't know if you're familiar with floating homestead or not. So let's say your property's worth $100,000 and DeKalb County says, no, it's really worth $200,000. And so your assessed value goes to $200,000. But the way a floating homestead would work is that your homestead exemption would float so that your property taxes couldn't increase any more than 3% or inflation, whichever is lower. And then you'd set the original standard based on some year that you felt comfortable with. So in Fulton County, I believe we passed the bill in 2019. But we set the standard rate to 2017 because they were having trouble getting their digest published. So you can set the digest to whatever the number was in some year everyone's comfortable with, so that, let's say, you know where your value was in 2020, and what that gives is, it gives you the guarantee of growth in your revenue. You're never gonna, a full cap is devastating for any government when you say you can't increase your taxes at all until someone moves or there's a major improvement done. But what this does do is it allows the system to experience growth, but then the property owners to have some relief to know that their property taxes won't go up more than 3%. So it became a pretty good compromise in Fulton County, and it allowed them to push off this idea of a full senior exemption. And they were talking about a full senior exemption, not a numeric number cap.
Yeah, so we had a full senior exemption, and it ended up costing us a lot more than anticipated. And then we did a study, and we set what we thought was a reasonable cap. Georgia State was able to give us recommended numbers, between certain ages and assessment caps and income ranges for a certain age range. So we were able to work with them to try to find compromise that worked both for the school system, but still provided some relief to our seniors. And so that's what we're voting on now, is this revised version. So we will see, I think, how accurate, close we are on those numbers, but we will have a chance to look at that again.
Although the committee studied, I mean, we had an option to floating homestead, you can call it that, but for whatever reason, the committee decided to focus on other plans. So it actually received quite a lot of thought and compromise on it, so it was a pretty good solution.
We feel good about it, and we hope that it.
It's a tough issue, but obviously that's something we could help you guys with, and continue to look at options. And if you're looking at making it permanent, I assume we'll have to go back to the ballot.
We'll have to go back to the ballot.
We were pretty happy with the 5-year sunset. 3 years is another matter, but the 5-year allows for adjustment to the, working with the tweak it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, maybe even if once they've seen the numbers and they're comfortable with it and there is some relief out there for seniors, they may want to make it a permanent exemption and not have to revisit.
That's probably not.
So you don't want that. You would want to be able to revisit it on a regular basis.
Well, so far, I mean, maybe after the next 5-year period, we're very comfortable.
Yeah.
But
2 years was a little faster than we wanted.
Okay.
5 years felt comfortable, but we were still really trying to figure out how it was affecting.
And if you would like, we can certainly bring some of the resources of, like, Fulton County, which they put in the floating homestead. We've worked with other systems that have done it, and they can kind of give you their experience, and so maybe that might weigh it too, and you might want to consider that. I think the sort of, from a political standpoint, from a legislative standpoint, being able to spread out the savings to everyone while not hurting the system was very palatable. And then, you can make the argument, who's the heart, if I'm buying my first home, maybe that's the person that needs the break, not someone who's had a whole lifetime to pay off their mortgage. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not trying to make the argument. I'm just saying there was a counter argument that says a floating homestead is relief to everyone.
Talking about the senior exemption, back to that House delegation, and having someone represent city, the city of Decatur as part of their full district instead of us being separated would help us when we move forward with trying to make sure that a representative is understanding we are a community.
We had many people to talk to, and it was more challenging. We're able to focus our energies on one person who also wasn't able to focus their energies on us. So,
But I think a good precursor is we saw that the Senate did drop the Congressional Map as sort of a trial balloon, and most of the counties were kept very whole. There weren't any split precincts, and so it does show that they're trying to make sure they produce a map that's very defensible in court, and the more communities are kept whole, the more defensible the map is. That's going to drive a lot of the decision making, and so I think that's the argument we should make to those who are drawing that.
Other priorities that I think for a school district are beneficial is making sure we keep local control. Giving that control of our school system is housed with our local school board. I think that's important, and any type of legislation that would take away that local control would be argued against. Try to make sure that that wasn't passed. And the other one is more, however, we've got to look at more funding for early learning. I think that is, to me, another huge priority as a school system. We are looking at how to, even just us as a school system, but the state is funding pre-K, it's funding early learning, just so, all students that need that early learning are getting that earlier.
We can always, we're glad to share with you if you wanted us to participate in your discussion when you're drafting your own priorities. We usually collect all the priorities from all the metro systems, and so we'll have a repository of that if you want to see what other systems are putting in.
I think we should have a priority on the local, I mean, I agree with both priorities, but it seems to me that the local control is one that's gonna come up with the priority thing, that we shouldn't have the ability to require masks or require vaccination or basically to keep it safe. Because the state doesn't want us to be able to do that. It ought to be our choice.
I always remind Governor Kemp every time we talk about this stuff. I said, you know, here's what you said to me. You said, everyone loves local control because they don't like the locals. So, and I think he really does believe in local control. I think he's a big believer in it. And I've seen him, you know, actually push back on legislation that strips local control. I think you do actually have an advocate in the governor's office.
And how would, some of the bigger conversation, but with us, you know, pushing to maintain local control, say for the resolution that was passed this summer, how does that, you know, legislation that puts us local control, how does that impact, say, if they did something more in terms of the Georgia School Board Association, the state board of education?
Are you talking about the CRT, or Right Theory Resolution?
Yes.
They're threatening to modify an actual.
I suspect you'll see that legislation. I absolutely expect to see something like that coming up. I would be shocked if someone didn't introduce it.
And so that is something we should be on record opposition to, and my sense of it is that there'll be a financial opposition. Won't be a lot.
But, no, I think that, again, you know, as you're drafting your package, what I also say for individual systems, sometimes it's best to let's have those types of things perhaps under the Georgia School Board Association or the Georgia Superintendent Association's agenda items. Because sometimes those are better to have as a unified front versus what I always recommend to local systems is let's do things that are specific to you, that you care about. So if it's specific funding for a specific type of program, those are things we can get, we can fight for. Those are, you know, big picture stuff. We should maybe approach the associations that represent you, and you've got Georgia School Board Association, the Georgia Superintendent Association, the Parent Teacher Association. Sometimes they get active in these things. So it might be better to parse that out, but again, it's completely up to you. But my recommendation usually is let's look at things that we can do that we know are specific to city schools in Decatur that you want to fight for, and that might be one of them. But that's such a big global issue that affects every system. We really ought to have the state associations being our lead blocker, so to speak.
It's the kind of thing where like Metro, RESA, gonna have more. I think there might be a difference within the state. Districts might be more aligned.
And just to be clear, when you say, you didn't mean Metro RESA, you just meant the Metro systems.
Or RESA in general,
That's what I meant, but I'm honestly not sure what that is. But isn't that the coalition of
So there's
Metro?
right, there is something, there is a, what is it called, what's the acronym again?
GEC.
The GEC, Georgia Education Coalition, which is comprised of large systems only, mostly. I don't believe I think City Schools of Decatur is a member. But when you said RESA, that's a state agency. So when I say that, they're apolitical and they wouldn't be allowed to take any positions. So when you said Metro RESA, there actually is something called a Metro RESA.
That's not what I'm thinking. What am I thinking of? It's the Metro Superintendent.
So the Metro Superintendents, we have like the Metro RESA, that's like our, like the state, but at the state level, like at the SSA, we're just.
But there is a.
And within GSSA, there is a large, I think they do parse it out where there's a set subgroup that sometimes has different policy goals than the rural systems.
The only point that I was trying to make is there might be a subset, a larger state agency
Right.
might want to kind of, pair up with, because this is, I think this is important to
Yeah.
everybody. But this, I think, of all the general issues, my guess is this is.
And certainly, I know that, the Cap Public Schools is a member of the GEC. And again, the GEC is the larger systems, and that is a political group with political goals. And they have a political agenda, and they will have a legislative agenda. And so that might be one that we can talk to CAB schools about and see if they're willing to push that issue as well. But I think certainly it all falls under this local control umbrella, because it is a question of local control.
Yeah, because the way you phrased questions for me, I think Maggie's point about increasing, for lack of a better phrase, COLA within the QE, if that's something that all school systems in Georgia are on board, then let's go at it in that direction, that's great. But being anti these CRT bad bills, which is something we are like very, would not like to see that bill passed. I don't know that that would universally be true amongst Georgia school systems. So help with identifying like-minded school systems and boards and helping find that out. Your input on what are the Decatur-specific areas that we can be looking on. The only thing that I can think of that we've talked about is a representative that makes the things that we want to do easier, so we're not calling 5 people that each have 5,000 constituents,
Right.
Decatur, is there anything else?
Specific to Decatur that I would recommend you look at.
Yeah.
Usually, and this is what I always sort of push people towards. Don't ask for, I want more funding. Ask for, I want more funding for early education, like you said. And this is what I need, this is how much I need, and this is what it would cost, and this is what it would do. So be very specific and thoughtful about what you're asking for, it's something that then the legislator say, well, I think I can do that. I think I can't get you across the board 20% more money, but maybe I can help this program, because that's how it works. The budget is so broken up into pieces that if I can find $1 million here and there, and I can put it in this budget, and this is what it'll fund. And so it's tougher for city schools administrators say, I want a bill that would prohibit anybody from prohibiting me from doing CRT. That's a tougher call. And then the question is, you hired us to help you pass and do things. Do you want us to sort of be, part of this bigger picture that's fighting this, or do you want to look for something specific to your system? So as specific as you can be, and that's why things like the IEP bill is so important, because that's something we can actually affect. If I can roll back and allow you to get your waivers back for that, that's something I think I can get done. Some of these other stuff, I'm not saying they're not lofty and important goals, but I'd rather be in the world of what can I actually do for you realistically, and say, these are the things I recommend. But then if you tell us this is what you want, we're agnostic to all policy. We simply promote what you ask us to promote. So if that's your policy, then we will promote it. That's what we're paid to do. But I'm just telling you, my recommendation is let's focus on something specific that we think we can actually get done and move the needle. So if it's giving you back your waivers on IEP, let's do that.
But the only other thing that comes to mind is those bills about the teachers' retirement system and supporting teachers. I mean, we've done a great job, I think, of moving the needle for teachers in Decatur. Maybe not advertising we have, but doing it. So as those bills become available, if we can help support those, that'd be great.
Absolutely. And that is something where, even though it is big picture, I think that individual information about how many teachers are, are able to recruit, is that a big part of your recruiting method? How long do teachers stay here? I suspect they probably stay in this system longer than, say, some of the bigger systems. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So moving on to the foreign language program evaluation.
Thank you.
to me, when I, oh,
Question about what's our process gonna be? Because we do need to come up with, short list priorities.
that's what I was gonna ask about, what we could get back.
Oh, it's kind of size, so,
Yeah.
You wanna decide it now?
Well, I think, to me, early learning, who's been wanting to build a new facility, purchase that land for a reason.
We wait for drainage.
Yeah. Yes.
But for what it's worth, my question is on the process. Are we gonna do that now, or are we gonna do it?
makes sense to do it now.
And then I think we're wrapped.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we vote on it
At the meeting.
get it to them to run with. I think that was, I mean, it's very helpful to hear also their perspective of, okay, here are all the things we talked about, for them to say, right, here's how the buckets we see them going into in terms of short term, see this larger lot use, we need to go with or some other groups to work together.
SBA usually does the capital where they have that meeting where we sit in the room and they kind of highlight specific bills that they are gonna be getting behind. Where do they have that?
I think it's right when the session.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I
you're right.
Is that one it is?
They're throughout the whole thing. They're done by congressional district. They've typically been
Okay.
very start usually around the 10th and 11th. Off.
So that should maybe help us with the direction on what you've been talking about. Maybe there'll be, like, CRT might be something that they will take on, that we can support, so.
They're definitely gonna, DSA is always going to be a proponent of local control.
Right.
Part of the whole reason it exists. So I think as we talk about drafting any resolutions that the board might be voted on for legislative priority, I really appreciated Don's presentation on, especially parsing out some of those bigger things that other organizations can help lead versus what we might be really interested in. One that I think the board should really strongly consider is funding for early learning, for our students, particularly to make sure that every student that attends the Decatur Housing Authority has access to free early learning starting at birth through pre-K. That to me would be a huge payback to and support for our community.
I agree. I think, as you were stating, the piece of land that we purchased with the hopes that housing and early learning, a bigger and, the facility, I think, we already started that process. So I would agree with that being one of our priorities.
And then I would love to move forward with Dawn on seeing what relationships we can build with delegates to partner, to keep Decatur together. I think that would be really helpful as things go up to the state legislator, to someone to speak for Decatur. What we can see is if we're trying to coordinate with 5 people, they've got very competing priorities when they're in Decatur or not in Decatur.
That should be our number one priority short term. I mean, because the things being
It's
resolved
yeah.
right now.
Right.
We can't do anything.
So be ready and willing to meet some of these delegates and have some lunches, and we've got to build that relationship. John said I went and met with Elena a couple weeks ago and had a really great just initial conversation with her, and she's definitely very interested in helping our city, and I want to keep moving forward. Whether it's her or a different delegate, kind of gives a sign that would really help our system, our city.
I think it's right. Elena has been, or Senator Trent has been, champion for the kids. So where we really need help, she also has a split district. House numbers, the representatives are where we're
Yes.
completely fractured.
Correct. Yes.
And to have somebody that's got a district
Yeah, sorry, I was sitting for a representative, she was sitting here.
I found the part about the QBE, like attacking columns of that, very interesting. Is that something that would be specific to us, or is that more in the bucket of working together with a larger organization to identify those things? Or do you talk about specific things like the rates for substitutions or clerical staff? Is that specific enough to be a Decatur item, do you think? Or?
To me, that's a bigger bucket piece with Georgia School, Superintendents Association, some other scale organizations, some of those other districts. I just don't think a lot of people realize. I think part of it is educating other people, and as when I talk to other superintendents after we do these budgeting classes, I'm like, do you realize that this is all you get? And they're like, no, even they don't know, because it just is in their budget and they're allocating it. So I think just raising that awareness is something that I've been doing as I make relationships with topics around the state.
Is that something we would put in this, let's put it in a separate, say that here are our priorities for local priorities, and here are our priorities for working with larger organizations?
We could do that.
I definitely would want to add critical race theory in there, just so that it's known that that's, you know, a priority for us.
I feel like that's the kind of thing that we should be working. I feel like it's a mistake. Politics of the SBA with the number. But it sure seems like that's the kind of thing. Trying to make sure that GSBA takes it. We're passive, that we're small, we don't have a. I feel like we owe it to ourselves, everybody else, to, you know, work for that issue. I think it's
the same thing. You know, when it's, you know, I know the GSBA is a huge organization. I was wondering if we leave it to the status up. And so, you know, I'd like us, you know, that, because it's, you know, other districts have not done everything that we have done and aren't as invested, as we have been in that work. And so I think, you know, when we pose the question of, you know, specific stuff, and I know it's such a big controversial issue early here, you know, south of Georgia, but I think it is a Decatur issue because not other districts have done as much as we have.
The other specific issues that we've had on our list in the past, I mean, I know that we need to have senior tax exemption back. Your sunset is going to come on back. The other one, tuition, which I would put on the list.
Decatur specific one that,
It's Decatur
it's
specific.
not necessarily so relevant right now, but it could be.
It's a tool.
Yeah, it is. It's a way for us to, like, we might have used it this year had it made financial sense to fill some classrooms at different grade levels. But we kind of abandoned that because it seemed like it was a losing proposition. We were gonna lose money.
And I'm not opposed to charging tuition. I think one thing to consider when you think about tuition is, are we a public school system or are we a tuition school?
Right.
That it's just, where do we lay on that?
Yeah.
And then how do we, once we are full, how do we make a determination on which students we accept with tuition and which we don't? And if we're going to accept students paying tuition, and let's say we want to charge $10,000, what do we say to the family that is really wanting to come here for the opportunity, but they can't pay the $10,000? How do we manage that process? So it's not just charging tuition, it's what do we do what are the next steps if we do charge tuition?
For what it's worth, I mean, I think all those are important, and one of the things we talked about is if we had tuition students, we could actually use it. Granting an appropriate number of scholarships, and using it as talent. But right now, we don't have the tool, and it's not, right now, it's not that big of an issue. It's the capacity. When we went and took out all the money to build these schools, a big part of the discussion was what happens inevitably. Go back down. Well, we'll be able to fill that seat for tuition. So I'm not concerned about the short term, 5 years. more that when the wave passes and we've got all these empty facilities, if we wait until then to fix the tuition problem, it'll be too late. It'll be a 5-year project to get the legislature to do it. All I think we should ask for is the ability to charge at cost, the average cost per student. I'm not suggesting profit off it.
Right, yeah.
Or just to have a tool in the toolbox.
I mean, that's,
Let me just make sure I've got all the list here. So I've got, one of our immediate priorities is working on, representative delegation. We're trying to work on one Decatur community rep. And then for another priority for local is early learning funding. Thank you. I should just turn my mic on. So early learning funding, to help provide, class-free childcare for families that are in need. I think that to me is a huge benefit, would be a big thing for us to accomplish. And then, let me see where my list is. So CRT is also putting a very declarative resolution on where we stand with CRT and equity work, I think is important. And then tuition, was that the last one?
senior tax.
Senior tax exemption. Okay, yes, I got that one. All right. Well, I will work with Don and his team and work on some resolutions, and I won't have them for the next board meeting in October, but probably the November. Hopefully, we can do a draft at a time and look at those. Okay?
Do we need to do the one about representation at the very next meeting?
I don't think we need that one as a vote. I think it's just really relationship building and letting them know that what we want when they assign those. But I'll check with him on that. Thanks, Christy. Ready? Turning it over to Dr. Bean. She is going to share some information about our world language program and some data for that, and kind of give you an update on where we are with that program evaluation. So thank you, Dr. Bean.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for having me, and thanks for listening. So, yeah, I'll just share a little bit about where we are. So we do have a process for curriculum and program evaluation. And so it is a 5-year cycle, and this is what it looks like. We have year 1, we have collect and study information. Then year 2 is the planning phase, and then years 3 to 5 are the implement and monitor phase. And so looking at where we are now there have been some adjustments recently due to COVID. I don't know why it looks punched up like that. It doesn't look like that on my computer, so sorry about that. But anyway, last year we were in the collect and study phase with math, and we were in the planning phase with our K-5 ELA, English Language Arts. And so this year we are in the implementation and monitoring phase with our K-5 ELA, and so that means, our district literacy team developed last year a district action plan, and like I said, now we are implementing and monitoring that with our foundations and our American Reading Company core curriculum that we have in our K-5 classrooms. And so implementing and monitoring means we're providing ongoing training, we're providing ongoing coaching, we are collecting data, and we are in the classrooms monitoring. And so that is where we are with that. With our math, with mathematics, where we are is during the collecting and study phase last year, the district math team, which is teachers, coaches, and administrators, developed a math action plan, which defines our beliefs, our goals, and our recommendations to create equitable structures and deepen mathematical understanding across the district. And so now we've moved to the planning phase with that, so that's where we plan to implement all the recommendations that they made. And so one of the recommendations was to adopt a consistent math curriculum across the district, and so we are evaluating that at this time. We're using the culturally responsive scorecard by the NYU, and we're using the IMET for math curriculum, which stands for the Instructional Materials Evaluation Tool. So once the math team narrows down the selection, the process for public review and public input will begin, just like it did with the ELA materials. So you can see that this year we are in the collect and study phase with our 612 English Language Arts and our K-12 World Language program. And so I know you have some interest in the K-12 Spanish program, so that's what we want to focus on today. Our 612 ELA is being led by our new district ELA math, ELA and social studies coordinator, our director, sorry, now I'm getting all tongue-tied, Courtney Simon, and she is lovely. If you haven't had a chance to meet her yet, I'm sure you will soon. Well, actually, you will at the next board meeting, because we'll be presenting again. But anyway, she is out visiting schools, she's attending team meetings, she's really gathering and collecting a lot of information this year, so that's where we are with that. But moving on to Spanish. So as I'm sure you are aware, our Spanish program is quite different and more mature than our French and German, world language program. So that's why we've really narrowed it down to what we're looking at this year is our K-12 Spanish program. We are supporting and doing some other work with French and German, but it is a little bit different at this time. So last year, our 612 World Language Program, Spanish, French, and German, really did a lot of work across the two buildings between Renfro and Decatur High School to align those courses so that Spanish 1, French 1 looks the same, whether you take it at Renfro, whether you take it at Decatur High School. So they did a lot of work with that. And like I said, being that our Spanish program is quite a bit more mature and larger than the other programs, that's where we are really focusing in on looking at that K-12 programs this year. So we do have some baseline data through STAMP and IB that I wanted to share. Our last administration was in 2020 for STAMP, and then of course we have the IB scores for 2021. For STAMP, it was administered in February, so it was pre-COVID, so there wasn't like an impact of that in the moment. The scores do range from a 1 to 9, and they do correlate. This chart shows how they correlate with other common language measurements, which are the American Council for Teachers of Foreign Language, the Interagency Language Foundation or Roundtable, and then the Common European Framework, and then College Board Continuum. And so here are our scores and how we compare nationally. You can just, like I said, this is from our 2020, February 2020 administration. You should note that there's some questions in the data, and that's one of the first things that we'll do with our program evaluation is kind of unpack that. For example, when you look across, one thing I noticed is we have some scores for AP students. Well, we don't offer AP German, so where did that come from? Well, 2 students in CSD apparently took the AP exam, whether they took it, whether they took the course at Georgia Virtual or they just opted to take the AP exam. So that score is based on 2 students who, again, took the, self-selected to take that exam. So things like that. You will also notice that there is quite a bit of variation in the number of students represented in the sample sizes. So, and yes, I know, is that correct? Those numbers are exactly equal. Well, according to the raw data I have, they are, which I know is very strange, but it is true. And so, anyway, these are the numbers that we have, and these are the raw, the number of students represented. So it's a huge range from, 444 students taking.
Chrissy, is that correct for year 1, 7th? Is it a 30?
Yes, 30 students. Well, because most of our students in 7th grade are in year 2.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, we give the test in 2nd, 4th, 7th, and 10th. So, yes, most of the students in 10th grade you can see are in year 4 or 5.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
Your comparison, you show the national scores comparison data, then our scores compare very favorably. I don't know how surprised I am by that, except that I think I used to think that we prioritize Spanish in particular, but foreign language instruction more than most other schools. Funded it even when most of the schools in the state weren't funding. and given that, I would think that, you know, I mean, is this comparison to other schools that are actually offering the program? And that's why, you know, we're not even up to par.
Right.
But if you included all the schools, including those that aren't offering any languages at all, but how should we look at that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're 100% correct. So we are comparing with other schools that have opted to take STAMP, which I would imagine that in this day and time, most elementary schools that are offering world language are offering like some type of immersion, either full day or part day immersion program. So I would say that's why you're seeing that difference. That's another thing that we can dig into, and I've already started digging into like what is the most common model, you know, these days, because, I don't think, there's not a lot of schools that I can find that are offering the type of model that we're offering. But that's something to look into. But I think it is important, and you'll see it also in our IB scores, the exposure that they're getting in the early grades, while it's, you know, it's not comparing favorably with immersion programs, it is giving them a benefit in the, you know, the outcome, the long run, so. Yeah. Well,
Is there a way to see the scores comparison for just Georgia?
That's a great question. I can certainly ask, yeah.
Yeah, and if it's something hard to get it, you know, no big deal, but I'm just curious.
Probably not. We, in fact, you know, that's something we've done just to veer off a little bit, that you can ask for and pay for, various different reports. We have done that with MAP this year, because that's what I said, you know, let's compare to Georgia, let's compare to like schools, let's compare, you know, I think it is important to see those comparisons, so that's something I can definitely ask about. And like I said, that will be the first step with the team, is just digging into what can we learn from this data and what does it tell? I mean, one thing we can see is that from second to fourth grade, the scores really aren't nuanced enough to give us a lot of information, because you see the students are in low to mid-novice, and they stay in low to mid-novice up there. But the teachers told me that they were able to use the scores to really parse out when you looked at the subscales, and to see, you know, oh, we need to really up our speaking, you know, our speaking skills and things like that. And so they were able to use it to inform their instruction. So that was positive.
Is there any way to be able to compare our program to other like programs? For example, remind me, but we're doing 4 days a week of Spanish at the lower elementary, is that right?
3 days a
3
week.
days a week at how many minutes?
90 minutes a week is what they're.
Okay, so 90 minutes a week. Is there any way to compare our 90-minute per week program with other 90-minute per week programs? Because I don't really see the benefit of comparing our 90-minute per week program with a program that's a complete immersion program. I wouldn't expect that we would have as high of a score, nor are we investing as much in the program. But I would see more, like, I would feel like it would be more useful to be comparing our apples to apples, like our 90-minute program per week with other 90-minute programs per week. Is there any way to know what kind of programs we're comparing?
Again, that's a great question, and that would come if STAMP has something like a like schools report.
Yeah.
That would be helpful. You know, we can also, as part of this, dig into, are there other ways to measure?
Yeah.
Like I said, I have not successfully, in this moment, I haven't done a deep dive, but I have not found a lot of schools that are doing what we do. A lot of what we do is offered like as after-school programs or things like that. But again, it doesn't mean it's not beneficial. You know, you can see that the outcome is our students are ending up,
Yeah.
you know,
And
that's the.
so do we know if, I'm kind of guessing and wondering that if in the high school, if the programs are more like, perhaps,
Yes.
because they're taking it every day.
Exactly.
And so I'm just thinking, because I don't like to do testing just for testing's sake. Maybe STAMP isn't, if we can't do a like apples to apples comparison at the lower grades, maybe STAMP isn't the right evaluation tool at those lower grades. If it doesn't give us useful information, maybe there's a different tool we use to evaluate, different standards, another way to achieve what we think we should be getting out of our investment in our students and our time and our money that we spend in programs. to measure it better, but maybe STAMP is the right tool for, some higher grades. I just don't wanna, we do testing for math, we do testing. In some years, some kids take, the math testing, and then the state testing, and then the STAMP testing, all one out together, and it's a lot of testing. Yes, it is. And so I would also want to kind of look at that to make sure that we are valuing a lot of the testing for it to continue.
I could push back on that.
Yeah.
So at one level, and I asked a question, and made it sound like I wanted to justify, so we feel good about the numbers. It's really what my intention is. When we have iteratively or successively scaled back our language program from 5 days a week, 4 days a week, caused quite an outcry. And basically, what we said at the time is a large number of parents who are very invested in the language, is that we can be just as effective with fewer hours. We're going to find it, and then we ask the question. How do you know that we're just as effective? How are we doing? And so STAMP was instituted, at least in part, to answer that question. So that as we have been cutting back and back and back, we can say, how's the quality of the program? And are we living up to the promise that we've made that we can be just as effective with fewer hours? So I'm not that interested in knowing we're as effective as other schools that are only offering 3 days of instruction. I want to, we've got constraints, we can only do what we can do, but we need to use this in order to evaluate the success of the program that we've got, so that we can study whatever tweaks you guys might make to make it better. It's not really, to me, about the comparison. It's more like we need to measure those so that when we tweak things, we know whether it had a good effect. That doesn't mean necessarily making everybody test all the time. You do sample tests. I don't know how you do it. We need some kind of a measure to evaluate our program.
I agree with the sentiment on that. I'm just wondering if we're getting even that
Yeah, I don't
from
know.
this.
I can't expect.
The only way I could see that we would be getting this, what you're asking for, which I agree is important, from these data, would be if we had this year over year and we saw either a decline or a growth,
I assume what
which
we're working
would
for,
be
right?
helpful, but I'm wondering if there could be something that not only does that, because if you take the same test with the same group of kids year after year, no matter what test it is, you should be able to see a trend. I would like to see that trend, but also maybe the other as well, like if that's possible, to make sure we're setting our standards with the investment that we're making, but also with us to growth.
I think to bring us back to board policy is the end policy is that our students will graduate being fluent in a second language in addition. So that is our language program getting us to that end. And it's approaching, but if we look at the STAMP data, we would want the numbers in the 9s, correct, Chrissy? Or it'd be advanced high, yeah.
Yeah, 8, 9.
So, like, right now, we see, like, we're not, it's just evaluating it based on one assessment. We see we're not quite where we would want to be as a school system. So now the question would be, what Chrissy's going to lead into next, is what are the next steps to evaluate the program to see what do we need to do and changes to get us there.
So when the board policy just references, put in a second language, is that with them starting at what grade? Sorry, okay.
That's when we start Spanish.
Well, and I'm not sure if the wording is fluent or proficient, so we may want to define exactly.
Is proficient or a 7?
Correct.
Or 8 or a 9? What do we mean by that? Correct.
Right, so I think, as you guys define the outcome, the expectation, then we can figure out how to, better.
It seems unachievable. I have one son. One of my sons graduated from Decatur High School completely. It has been marvelous. I've got 5, and he's the one. And I'm not aware of any of his cohort. All themselves fluent.
That's
Yeah,
a pretty
that's
high bar.
very
Without
That's a
being-
pretty high bar.
Without being immersed. But,
Right.
I guess I'm curious, how many do take Spanish? Or are they doing it?
So we, again, we don't offer the languages in AP, we offer them in IB. And
But I mean, do any of the kids take the test?
that's a good question. They did not, I'll double check.
Okay.
But I-
Because it would be one way to, best way to.
So year 6, year 6, the year 6/AP, so there may have been some of those students, again, they would self-select, to go take the exam or to take the class, like at Georgia Virtual or something, because we don't necessarily offer that. But if you look at so IB has they have language A, which is your native tongue. They have, language B, which means you've had some experience with the language, and then they have AB Inicio, which we don't offer any of those courses for the diploma program. So all of our world languages are, language B that we offer in the diploma program. And so you can see, and the reason that's in red over there, it's only HL high-level course that we offer for the world languages. So you can see the difference in the pass rate. Again, the numbers are much larger with our Spanish classes than they are with French and German. So, be mindful of that. But also you can see that, we're approaching the world average, the world pass rate. So that's pretty good there. Do they take that year 6? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are you doing with this? Like, what's the next step? You've got this data.
Well, that is a great question. Thank you for asking. So where we are is that we are going to be looking this year at a program evaluation, and what that means is that our Spanish review team, which is my department, me, and our K-12 Spanish teachers, and we have a new Spanish content lead for the district, which is Graham Pereira, and he's one of our high school teachers, and so he will be leading this work for us. And then we will engage in a comprehensive evaluation, and our outcomes that we expect are to have that clear, coherent program overview. What are our expectations of our program? How are we going to achieve your expectations, rather, let me say it that way, and what that would look like at each stage. And then what are the attributes of our elementary program, and what are the best practices, the current practices, and the recommended practices, looking at the curriculum, how we deliver the instruction, what professional learning is needed, and then we will make the recommendations back to you. So what is the process that we'll use to do that? So first step is that we will start by looking at program design. Really, the National Association of District Supervisors for Foreign Language has a really excellent, well-detailed program design for foreign language programming, and so we will dig into that. We will look at the core practices from resources such as the American Council of Teachers of Foreign Language, and then we will work to define what does a highly effective K-12 language program look like, and that will include what are the goals and the indicators for success. So hopefully we will see that looks a lot like what we have right now. And with a few tweaks, like you said. And then we will gather our data, which we have already started gathering that, but what other pieces that we need, maybe that we need some surveys, maybe we need to talk with students, we need to do some focus groups, enrollment and course data, and really dig into those numbers, and like you said, look at, the growth of the courses, and are we seeing trends, which students are deciding to switch over to German and French and those types of things. And then looking at our biliteracy diploma rates as well, which we do have, that's probably one of our strengths, and that was where we can compare, and I don't have that data on hand, but I will share it with you. Across the state of Georgia, there's a biliteracy seal if you reach a certain level of competency, and I know we are very strong in that area, so that is something to be proud of. And then, once we are looking at the data and analyzing that, pulling our units together, reviewing and revising those units, which like I said, 612 did a lot of that work last year, but we will do that with K-5. Look at our resources, look at our practices, and then make recommendations on what we need to, change, revise, review, or improve on. And then next, we will review the current models, again, that are local and national, and define what the models are that we are using and what we recommend. You may have heard about the FLEX and the FLEX and the, dual immersive. There's lots of different models, so it's not that one's necessarily better than the other. It's just what are we using and what is our anticipated outcome. And so then, reviewing the current research about those best practices and defining what practices we want. And then, this is where we get into the meat of it. What are the expected outcomes for each grade level, and how are we going to measure that? And that's where I think we can pull together kind of what you guys are both talking about, because as we've noticed, the stamp may not be nuanced enough at those lower grades to pull out that information that we want. So if we had some common benchmarks where we could measure that year after year, can all kindergarten students count to 10 in Spanish, for example, or something like that, then we could say every student has this, and then every student gets to 6th grade who's been with us knowing this. And so then those Spanish 1 teachers know exactly what to expect from their students. So they're in a little bit better, place to start, instead of having, I think, there's a little bit of inconsistency now, just from the nature of the program as we have it now, and just, so students are learning lots of things, but are they learning consistently the same thing across the time? So that's kind of how we want to pull it together. And then what professional learning do our teachers need? What do we need to be providing for them? And then, like I said, the last step will be summarizing those findings, any budgetary considerations that we need to be aware of, and then reporting that back to the
question that I have, or maybe it's a comment, but when you do this, there's kind of two ways to think about it. One is to say, how can we maximize the program within the constraints currently that have been set? So that might result in a determination that fluency is out of the picture. 9 minutes instruction a week. Maybe that's not realistic and it's not the right goal. We should settle for proficient. Another way to look at it is to say we set a policy, we set a goal, and we said the kids are fluent. What's that going to take? And so as you're doing the evaluation, it's not going to be presented to me because I'm not going to be here, but are on board, I'd want to know what would it take. I wouldn't want to know just how can we do with what we've got. I'd want to say, to really reach that higher level, talking about an extra 30 minutes in the classroom, class day, because I think that was what we were told at the time, scaled back most recently. It's going to cost X dollars, you're going to need to hire this many teachers, 30 minutes in school. That's kind of what we're doing. I'd like to hear that, so that we kind of know when we're making these trade-offs exactly what we're trading.
Yeah, and that's something, I hope that the teachers will help me to research. I have not been able to find anything that says if you have this many minutes every week, by golly, you're gonna, So I think there's also, you have to look at how is it being applied. Are we teaching it within the context? Can we incorporate it more into the general ed classrooms? We're teaching students to count and add in the lower elementaries. Can we teach them to count and add in 2 languages simultaneously? So I think, I think there's lots of creative ways and ways that represent best practices that may not necessarily cost money, but just pulling things together. And again, I think we see that the overall outcome is beneficial to the students. It's just, it takes a minute to see it, but that exposure in the early years seems to be
just
beneficial.
suggesting it's not limit yourself. Something that's important. That's not you don't edit it out of the conversation before that.
Yeah, looking at different tiers and what that could potentially, look like. And what kind of benefit we'll get from it. That would be, and that, to his point, that was what the community really wanted to see. If we're doing this, and if we're scaling back, and then we're agreeing with the reasons why we're scaling back and how we've made these changes, how are our students still benefiting? And it's probably going to be in the elementary level conversation, because clearly, by the time we get to the 6th year, we're kind of on par with the world. Can't really do better than that.
Right.
So I think, the IB program especially is showing that it's worth and benefit in that area. So maybe then just having a little bit more of a focus on the elementary and maybe what we can do there, and immersion probably is the easiest, because that's how they learn when they're that young. It's just a little bit more immersed into it, not necessarily like some of the other schools are doing. Yeah, I would be just curious to see what that will look like, for sure. Thank you.
Appreciate it. We'll see you back in 2 weeks.
Yes, we will.
I don't remember ever seeing this kind of program evaluation. I know it's been
Not the language.
really good.
Yeah, excellent.
I do appreciate seeing the trend, because I do believe there's value in introducing it early. Just need to see how that goes. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I think that, is everything on our agenda, right? Anybody have anything they want to talk about before we adjourn? All right, our, work session is ending, 7:40 PM. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a good evening.